What if the global trade order flipped overnight and nobody told you? While most Americans slept, headlines erupted. President Donald Trump threatened a punishing 35% tariff on Canadian imports starting August 1st. In a fiery ultimatum, he demanded a deal or devastation. But across the northern border, something extraordinary happened. Canada didn't flinch. There was no outrage, no televised retaliation. Instead, Mark Carney, the quiet architect of Canada's economic policy, shut the door firmly and without a sound. This isn't just about steel or spreadsheets. This is about something far deeper: trust, stability, leadership. Trump is playing poker with the global economy, bluffing with bluster-raising stakes with every tweet. But Carney isn't at that table anymore. He's building a new one. A global realignment is unfolding, and the United States, once the centerpiece of international commerce, is at risk of being sidelined by its own volatility. For decades, America dictated the rules. Today, it breaks them, and allies are noticing. Europe is pivoting, Asia is aligning, markets are moving away from Washington and toward Ottawa. This isn't some abstract economic theory. It's a revolution in motion. And here's the twist: Carney isn't trying to defeat Trump. He's trying to escape him. So, the question now is not will Canada cave, it's what happens when the world stops fearing the bully and walks away from the playground. Because in 2025, the loudest sound in geopolitics isn't Trump shouting, it's Canada's silence. Strategic, measured, powerful. Welcome to the new front line of global power, a war not of weapons but of wisdom. And the question every nation must now ask is: the future built on threats or on trust? Trump's playbook is familiar by now: threats first, strategy later. When he announced the 35% tariff against Canada, it wasn't part of a broader economic vision, it was a reflex, a performance. One meant to project strength while masking instability. But in 2025, the world isn't buying the act anymore. For years, Trump has framed tariffs as tools of dominance, economic weapons, he calls them. But for Canada, these weapons have become old news. Under Mark Carney's leadership, Ottawa didn't engage in a shouting match. It executed a silent retreat, not into weakness but into design. While Trump turned up the volume, Carney turned up the planning. As the White House roared about patriotism and punishment, Canada signed quiet agreements with Germany, South Korea, and Japan. It retooled steel exports away from Detroit and into national defense contracts at home. It redirected supply chains without fanfare. Where Trump demanded loyalty, Carney engineered independence. And the contrast couldn't be clearer. Trump governs through friction, Carney governs through frictionless precision. One throws punches on social media, the other drafts trade corridors behind closed doors. It's not just about Canada resisting tariffs, it's about Canada rewriting the rules. In a game once rigged to favor American muscle, Carney found a way to win with soft power. He didn't boycott America. He simply made it optional. The effects are already visible. Canadian exports to the EU are up. Foreign investors are shifting funds into Canadian markets. Trade confidence is rising not because Canada is bigger, but because it's calmer. This isn't about economic might, it's about economic maturity. While Trump talks about winning, Carney is ensuring his country never has to play America's game again. Because sometimes the strongest response isn't retaliation, it's reinvention. Trump promised strength, but the markets are delivering a different verdict. Since his tariff declaration, the US dollar has fallen over 20% in just 6 months. That's not just a line on a chart, it's a seismic shock to global confidence. Investors are no longer seeing the United States as a haven of predictability, but a source of volatility. And in the age of economic fragility, volatility is poison. Inflation is surging, groceries, gas, rent, all spiraling upward, while the administration insists this is America first. But ask any American family living paycheck to paycheck, does patriotism pay the bills or does it just make them more expensive? Meanwhile, Canada's markets are telling a different story. Trade deals inked with the European Union, South Korea, and Japan have boosted Canadian exports by double digits. Germany is in talks with Ottawa for a multi-billion-dollar green energy corridor. Instead of reacting emotionally, Carney is attracting capital by offering the one thing the US no longer can: stability. Even American manufacturers are feeling the fallout. Construction firms that rely on Canadian steel are postponing projects. Farmers caught in the crossfire are losing access to global markets. Supply chains once seamlessly integrated across North America are now fracturing. And the damage isn't theoretical. It's happening on job sites in rural towns across the Rust Belt Trump once vowed to revive. Trump may still command headlines, but Carney is commanding investment flows. While Washington throws tantrums, Ottawa is issuing bonds. While Trump tweets, Carney signs contracts. This is the battleground of 2025, not in debates or rallies, but in boardrooms and trade hubs. And right now, the scoreboard is tilting north. Because in global economics, slogans don't move money. Stability does. Carney's quiet defiance is not just a reaction, it's a doctrine. Rather than retaliate tit for tat, Canada has taken the high ground. No screaming tariffs, no political theatre. Instead, they delayed their digital services, tax, strengthened border security, and expanded industrial training programs to shift production inward. It's not weakness, it's strategic patience. This is leadership in slow motion, steady, calculated, and surgical. While Trump tries to strong arm global allies, Carney is creating alternatives, new supply corridors through Asia, defense procurement chains that no longer rely on US exports, investments in clean energy partnerships that will last decades beyond any administration. The message is subtle but seismic. You can't build a reliable economy on tantrums. You need trust, infrastructure, and vision. And as the world grows weary of American impulsiveness, Carney's model is becoming the blueprint for post-American leadership. Canada's rise isn't driven by military might or social media noise. It's driven by clarity, by policy crafted to last longer than a press cycle. And in a world where stability is scarce, that clarity is currency. Other nations are watching. European leaders are echoing Carney's tone. Tokyo is exploring new trade pacts that bypass US intermediaries. Even Mexico has quietly begun diversifying its supply routes. The shift is not explosive, it's evolutionary. Trump governs for the applause, Carney governs for the outcome. And the outcome is this: the world is decoupling from America's volatility and walking towards something calmer. Because real power doesn't shout, it builds. So here we are, less than a week before Trump's tariffs take effect, and Canada isn't blinking. While Trump dares Carney to fold, Carney dares the world to imagine something better. A trade ecosystem where fear isn't the currency, where silence speaks louder than slogans, where strategy defeats spectacle. And here's the real question: if Canada can walk away from chaos, who's next? What happens when Germany, Australia, or France decide that depending on the United States is no longer strength but risk? What happens when global commerce flows through new channels quietly constructed, deliberately led, and no longer centered on Washington? We may be witnessing more than a trade dispute. We may be witnessing a global power transition. And when the dust settles, history may not remember who shouted loudest. It will remember who planned longest. Let us know in the comments below. Should more countries follow Canada's example? Can quiet leadership outlast loud disruption? This isn't just a news story, it's a mirror, and the reflection is changing. In the summer of 2025, the world witnessed more than a trade war, it witnessed a philosophical collision between two models of power. One, embodied by Donald Trump, was loud, erratic, and built on threats. The other, led by Mark Carney, was quiet, deliberate, and rooted in design. This confrontation between chaos and stability offers lessons far beyond tariffs or border politics. It challenges us to rethink what leadership looks like in an increasingly unstable world. The first lesson is that strength is no longer measured by noise but by consistency. For decades, American influence operated on predictability. Allies trusted Washington because its policies, while powerful, were generally stable. That trust formed the foundation of global trade. But under Trump's impulsive tariff threats and sudden policy shifts, that foundation cracked. By contrast, Carney's Canada remained steady. It didn't retaliate with fury, it responded with foresight. That contrast exposed a deeper truth in geopolitics. Uncertainty isn't power, it's poison. And in a world that craves predictability, stability becomes the new currency of strength. Secondly, we learn that power built on fear is fragile. Trump's approach relied heavily on economic intimidation, slapping tariffs, issuing ultimatums, and framing diplomacy as a game of poker. But fear-based leadership only works as long as people stay afraid. The moment Canada stopped fearing, the entire power dynamic shifted. Carney didn't fight back with tariffs, he fought back with strategy. He redirected supply chains, forged new alliances, and demonstrated that nations, even smaller ones, can walk away from the table. That quiet defiance reveals an enduring truth. Real sovereignty is not the ability to dominate others, but the ability to design one's own future. A third lesson comes from the market's reaction. Markets don't follow slogans, they follow systems. While Trump declared America first, investors were pulling out. Inflation was rising. The US dollar was tumbling. Construction firms were stalling. Meanwhile, Canada, without slogans or rallies, was signing trade deals, boosting exports, and attracting capital. The numbers didn't lie. They spoke louder than politics. It became clear that in a data-driven world, performance outshines performance art. And investors, like citizens, follow trust, not tantrums. There is also a powerful message about the nature of modern alliances. The Canada-US split showed that long-term friendships can't survive on pressure alone. Carney's diplomacy attracted not just European or Asian partners, it inspired confidence from the global south, from middle powers, from countries tired of being pawns in big power games. His actions reminded the world that alliances forged through respect last longer than those forced through fear. This is a crucial message for smaller nations. They don't need to choose between submission and isolation. With enough patience and policy clarity, they can build their own coalitions. Perhaps the most overlooked lesson is that soft power is not weakness, it is the architecture of resilience. Trump's leadership thrived on confrontation. Carney's succeeded through cooperation. Trump sought submission, Carney sought consensus. And yet it was the latter who walked away stronger. Canada did not win the trade war by overpowering the US, it won by outlasting the chaos. This suggests that in the age of global disruption, resilience, not revenge, is the ultimate political capital. There is also a painful reflection here for Americans themselves. The crisis exposed not just a trade imbalance but a leadership imbalance. While Carney governed for outcomes, Trump governed for attention. That distinction mattered deeply, because while Carney's policies were invisible to most voters, they built real results. Meanwhile, Trump's spectacles lit up the media but scorched public trust. The public, especially in working-class America, paid the price. From Midwest farmers to coastal construction firms, the very people Trump claimed to protect became victims of his volatility. Their pain is a reminder that political theatrics may win headlines, but they can destroy livelihoods. Furthermore, this episode teaches us that trust, once broken, rarely returns. America's image as a stable leader of global commerce was damaged not by war but by whim. Countries and corporations realized that a tweet could shift policy overnight, and they acted accordingly. Canada, in contrast, showed what happens when leadership is boring but reliable. And in doing so, it became a blueprint. Other nations are now exploring similar paths, building regional trade corridors that bypass Washington entirely. That's not isolationism, it's self-preservation. Finally, the deepest lesson may be about the future of leadership itself. In an era of loud populism, quiet planning may be the true revolution. Mark Carney didn't make headlines, he made agreements, he didn't rally crowds, he rebuilt systems. And while Trump's style captured attention, it was Carney's strategy that captured the future. This story is not just about two leaders, it's about two visions of the world. One thrives on dominance, the other thrives on design. One demands loyalty, the other earns trust. One shouts, the other builds. As the dust settles from the 2025 trade shock, the global community stands at a crossroads. Will the next decade be defined by nations mimicking Trump's volatility, or will they learn from Carney's steadiness? The answer lies not in politics but in what kind of world we want to live in, one built on fear and fire or one built on trust and planning. For now, the lesson is clear. Sometimes the loudest leader loses, and sometimes the quietest voice changes everything. While many viewed Trump's tariff blitz as an act of strength, it ironically revealed the limits of coercive power in a globalized era. The United States could raise tariffs, disrupt markets, and make headlines, but it could no longer dictate the future. Because in a multipolar world, control isn't maintained through domination, it's maintained through credibility. And credibility, once lost, shifts the gravitational pull of influence elsewhere. that elsewhere was increasingly Canada. Mark Carney's strategy worked not because it was louder, but because it was longer. It wasn't reactive, it was architectural. He didn't fight every tweet or retaliate after every insult. He built alliances, rerouted exports, and quietly diversified Canada's economic dependencies. It wasn't flashy, it was deliberate. But that's exactly what made it powerful. This taught the world that power is no longer about size, it's about structure. Canada is not a superpower. It does not have a vast military empire or dominate media narratives. Yet in 2025, it moved the world more effectively than Washington. That movement happened in silence, in boardrooms, in investment flows, in corridors of diplomacy, far from the spotlight. It was a masterclass in asymmetrical influence. And that's where the real lesson lies. Leadership today isn't about commanding fear, it's about building alternatives. In this context, smaller nations are watching closely. Many are asking themselves a new question. If Canada can chart its own course, why can't we? If the world is drifting away from unstable giants, is now the time to build resilient coalitions among stable middles. These aren't theoretical questions. They are becoming the guiding principles of trade ministries, central banks, and infrastructure councils around the globe. The US strategy under Trump failed not just because of what it did, but because of what it refused to understand. You cannot impose stability through chaos. You cannot inspire loyalty through fear. And you cannot lead by burning bridges while asking others to follow. The shift wasn't just material, it was psychological. Trust once broken becomes contagious. Nations that once feared alienating America began cautiously exploring alternatives. Europe deepened ties with Canada. Japan praised Canada's strategic clarity. South Korea followed with mutual trade facilitation. Even Mexico, the United States' long-standing NAFTA partner, began laying groundwork for bilateral resilience plans with Ottawa. This ripple effect marked something extraordinary, the slow-motion formation of a post-American trading bloc not founded on ideology, but on necessity. Let's be clear, this isn't an anti-American movement, it's a survival instinct. Nations aren't against the US, they just can't afford to anchor their futures to its instability anymore. What Carney accomplished wasn't just economic defense, it was a global signal, a blueprint. He showed that a country doesn't have to be loud to be leading. It just needs to be trustworthy. And that leads us to a profound realization. In the 21st century, leadership is no longer a contest of dominance, but a competition of trust. The implications for the United States are enormous. If it continues down the path of performative nationalism, it will lose not only influence, but relevance. Economic power is not inherited, it is maintained. And maintenance requires humility, patience, and predictability. In 2025, Trump offered none of those. Carney offered all three. The results are now being etched into trade flows, migration of capital, and future diplomatic realignments. Americans themselves are not immune to these consequences. The average worker, the family-run farm, the small-town factory, they're the ones who suffer when tariffs spike, projects stall, and supply chains break. Yet they're often told that these disruptions are a form of strength. That myth is one of the most damaging illusions of modern populism. The real cost of Trump's policies wasn't paid in press conferences. It was paid in paychecks. And as inflation spread, job cuts deepened, and construction froze, the applause from political rallies began to feel like echoes from another reality. This is the emotional undercurrent of the crisis. The betrayal of those who trusted the promise of economic protection only to receive economic punishment. And it's not just economic, it's spiritual, it's psychological. The collapse of trust in governance is harder to quantify, but far more corrosive. Once people stop believing that leadership has their best interests at heart, they disengage. Or worse, they radicalize. Carney's success offers an antidote. It reminds us that dignity in leadership is not a weakness, it is the foundation of legitimacy. That listening is not surrender. That respecting others doesn't make a country smaller, it makes it more dependable. This narrative matters not only for North America,